Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Mia KurtzFavero. Mia, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're going to be talking coaching and parenting and combining the two, discussing the dual role, something we haven't spoken about on the Sports Psych Show. Over 300 episodes now, we haven't spoken about that. So I'm really excited to unpack a paper that you've recently completed alongside other researchers on this. Before we get on to that, Mia, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your work.
Yeah, so I just finished my master's degree in sports psychology at Queen's University under the supervision of Dr. Jean Cote. So I was there. I also did my undergrad there. I was there for the last 6 years. And my master's work focused on coaching, but specifically helping coaches develop their interpersonal and intrapersonal skills through a reflection tool that we created. So I was really fortunate to be able to combine my passion for coaching, because I'm also a coach, with the research and kind of work on that for the last 2 years through my master's. And so, like I said, I'm a youth sport coach. I coach volleyball. So I coach club teams, a high school team currently as well. And then I've also worked with the provincial youth team for the last few years too. Again, coaching boys volleyball. So volleyball is kind of my main sport. That's what I love. But then growing up, I also played numerous sports, but volleyball being the main one.
Do you still play?
I do, yes. Play in a few adult leagues and also beach volleyball as well. I really enjoy it, and it's a way I play with my family and my brothers too on some teams. So it's a great way to spend time with family and also still enjoy the sport.
And how long have you been coaching for?
I've been coaching for about 5 years now. I started when I was actually a player. I took a year off from playing when I was younger and kind of tried my hand in coaching and really enjoyed it. And then through my master's, I knew that I wanted to get back into it. So the last few years, I started doing that with the club team and then just kind of said yes to every opportunity that I could. And that's how I got involved with the provincial team.
And did you find your game, your playing ability evolve as you coached? Did the introduction of coaching actually change your game at all, improve your game at all?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm definitely become a better player because of coaching. I think I understand the technical aspects a little bit more now than when I was just playing. It's funny that you asked that. Actually, I am currently coaching my brother, and we also play in a league together. And we were playing last week, and he said to me, "It's really interesting watching you play because you do all the things that you tell us to do when you coach us." And I thought that was funny because it coaching has definitely made me a better player for sure.
So you're actually practicing what you what you preach. It's a good job
Yeah,
that you are.
trying to anyways.
And you mentioned there that you've just finished your master's in sports psychology, so you're very much in the opening rungs of this journey. If you were to journey into the world of sports psychology, but what took you to doing a sports psychology master's?
Yeah, I think right from being a young athlete, I was always interested in the psychology part of things. Um, and and then obviously getting the opportunity to coach when I was a young athlete as well kind of opened me up to the different side of the game, the mental side, and how there's this whole other area that you can kind of dive into that really impacts the sport and how you play. So I think I knew from a very young age that I wanted to go into that, and then I had some opportunities throughout my undergrad degree to work within the plays lab at Queen's University and um, try my hand at research and specifically within sports psychology, and just fell in love with it and had a really great experience within the lab and with Dr. Cote. So yeah, that's how I kind of became interested in it.
And you mentioned that you played numerous sports, but volleyball's been your main sport. You must spend so much time with volleyball players on a daily basis. Are they quizzical when you describe what you do, or is that something that they're quite familiar with, sports psychology?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they're super familiar with it right now. I coach 16 and 17-year-old boys, and so getting them to buy into some of the sports psychology aspects is sometimes a little bit challenging because they just want to play. But working with them and getting them to kind of understand the importance of it and how it really can impact their game, I think is a big benefit, and it definitely changes it for them once they kind of start to understand and buy into it a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Now, we're here today to talk about a paper that you completed during your master's degree. The paper is entitled Exploring the Implementation and Practices of the Parent-Coach Dual Role. And as I mentioned earlier, we've had some great episodes on effective sports parenting, but we haven't actually unpacked anything with relation to that dual role of being a parent and being a
Mhm.
coach, which must be enormously tough to achieve. And look, you completed this paper alongside colleagues and also your supervisor, the very great Professor Jean Cote,
Yeah.
one of the leaders in our world, Alex Murata, Niall Stridham, Tiffany Say, and Guillaume Costa. So you had some good colleagues there to help you. Why this parent coach dual? What take me through the sort of the genesis of this research paper? Why did you take things in this direction for you in your master's degree?
Yeah, for sure. So I think before I came into the plays lab, there was kind of a an understanding that, the lab wanted to make sport a better place. And a lot of the times I think parents in sport are villainized. And so there was kind of this idea of, okay, how can we take this idea of parents being villainized, but make it a better sporting experience for everyone? And that includes parents. And so, how can we as research improve parents' lives in sport because they're a big part of sport as well as their athletes in youth sport. And so when I came into the lab, I really had a passion for coaching, like I said. So it made sense to combine the two worlds of improving parents' lives in sport, but then also bringing in the coaching side of it as well. And so that's how kind of the parent coach idea came about. And then specifically, the kind of idea for the paper was a lot of the research on parent coaches was about how parents can be good parents while also inhabiting the role as a coach. And so we kind of wanted to flip the script a little bit and look at how parents can be effective coaches while still being a parent. And so kind of doing the opposite of what the current research was doing.
Was there absolutely no research out there on the effectiveness of coaching with relation to being in that dual role?
Not that I found, but I don't want to say that for for fact, just in case that I'm wrong.
But your supervisor, Professor Cote, didn't necessarily suggest that there was anything out there.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So really, a blank canvas. It's amazing that that is a blank canvas because that's such an important thing to consider: the effectiveness of your coaching whilst you're engaged in that parent coach role.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially considering, we were looking at kind of the demographics of who the coaches were in our youth sports system, and there's percentages as high as 90% of youth sport coaches are also parents. So the fact that there was not a lot of research in this area is kind of crazy, given that very high statistic,
90%.
as high as 90%. Yeah.
As high as no. Wow,
Mhm.
that's incredible. That's incredible. And I suppose a lot of people just fall into that. They're just asked on the sideline, right? Will you actually coach this team?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's, yeah, obviously with 90%, there's not a lot of non parent coaches, just volunteers such as myself. I'm not a parent. And so I think you're right. A lot of parents just kind of get thrown into that because their child is playing and the team needs a coach. And so they graciously step up and say that they'll take that on.
Well, what I'm excited to do today is unpack the findings. I do think this is really fascinating. If I'm a parent coach, I do have to consider, and I suppose these parent coaches are considering all the time how effective they can be. How can they be effective? What does effective look like in that role? What are the specific challenges there? So I'm really excited to unpack the results side of things, but to bring this alive for us, to break this down for us. How did you go about conducting this research? Tell us a little bit about the method here.
Yeah, so we interviewed 14 parent coaches of different sport contexts and age levels that their child was in. And so what we did for the interview was we kind of separated the sections into Cote and Gilbert's definition of coaching effectiveness. And the key part that we used from that was interpersonal knowledge, intrapersonal knowledge, and professional knowledge. And so the professional knowledge is more of the technical, tactical knowledge, the knowledge that you need to coach the specific sport. The interpersonal knowledge is the social relationships that a coach may have. So that could be with your athletes or with parents or with other coaches. And then the intrapersonal knowledge is the introspection, the reflective part of it. And so we kind of broke that interview guide into those three sections and asked coaches questions based on each of those areas.
How did you find the whole interview process?
It was interesting. I think, if you've talked to a bunch of coaches before, I'm sure once you get coaches talking about coaching, they just kind of go on and on. They love coaching and they love talking about it. And then you pair that with parents talking about their child. And so then it's just, they love to talk about those two things in particular. So there was a lot of really interesting and rich data that we got from the interviews. And it was a great opportunity. That was actually the first time that I had conducted interviews before. So it was a really cool experience for me.
So there was a lot of data to mine through, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of data, a lot of very interesting things going on. But yes, for sure, a lot of data.
All right. Well, let's unpack the results side of this. Let's unpack this data to discover what you found. We can start wherever you want. So, I mean, the paper itself, you firstly describe the interpersonal knowledge as a parent coach. Is that where you'd like to start here?
Sure. Yeah. Sounds
Okay.
good.
Well, tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, so for the interpersonal knowledge, one of the main things that came out of it was that coaches experience a challenge of feeling that they displayed excessive demands or criticisms toward their own child compared to other athletes on the team, and kind of seeing the faults more than others. And I think that a lot of parents talked about that coming from wanting their child to develop, but also having a level of comfort and trust with their own child, that they felt they were able to be a little bit more honest and critical with them than they would necessarily with another child that wasn't their own. And so that was a big challenge for parents. And from a coaching effectiveness lens, that is a little bit difficult because, or it proves to be a challenge because kind of focusing on one child negatively isn't really conducive for positive development overall. And so that was definitely a major challenge and barrier that parent coaches felt that they experienced with their own child.
Yeah, I mean, just picking out a quote here in the text, straight away somebody said it's easy to point out their faults to them. I mean, this is their child. It's easy to point out their faults to them, easier than other kids. I find if there is a negative aspect about my kid, I know that I am guilty of pointing that out to them. It's not even favoritism, it's almost worse, which it actually does sound worse. It's like I'm picking on my kid, in a way. I mean, it just feels so onerous for any parent coach to have to go in there and immediately regulate themselves and ensure that they're not engaging with their child in a maladaptive way, in an unhelpful way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. I think too, it also went to the other extreme end of sometimes coaches kind of didn't give any feedback to their child. They tried to avoid that situation altogether so that they weren't too critical or harsh on their own child. And so some of the coaches talked about, when a practice was split and some athletes went to one side and some athletes went to the other, they purposely went to the side that their child was not, so that they didn't feel that they needed to navigate that critical feedback with their own child. They just kind of removed themselves from that situation, or they had assistant coaches kind of take over giving their own child feedback so that they were removed from that. And so either way, either it's very critical or you're avoiding it altogether. From a coaching effectiveness perspective, it's not great for development when the child is either getting no feedback or they're getting really critical feedback. So it's an interesting balance for sure.
Well, you break down the interpersonal knowledge as a parent coach into four areas. As we've mentioned here, having an overly critical eye. So navigating that communication of being critical. The second one is open communication, utilizing children as a resource toward improvement. And then another one is acting as the team mum.
Mhm.
Can you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, the acting as the teen mom, I think, is very interesting. And so that was kind of the idea that mother coaches don't always actually separate their role as a parent and as a coach. And it's interesting because that was a previous recommendation from previous literature, was to kind of separate those roles and be very clear and distinct with your child about that. And so what I found was that a lot of mother coaches didn't separate those roles, but actually embraced a mother coach role, and took on kind of a team mom role with every athlete on the team and not just with their own child. And so that kind of came out with, they would allow other athletes on their team to call them mom as well as their own child. And so that kind of created an environment where the mother didn't feel that they were singling out their child because they were in their mind treating the whole team as their own children. And so that was a really interesting finding for sure.
That's interesting. Almost using that as a strategy, a maternal strategy, as opposed to, I suppose, a paternal hat. I mean, it just again lifting a quote here. I know people who ask their child to not call them mum or dad while they're their coach, and I've never understood that. Everybody knows who they are to me, and I always say to my three children, "There's only three people in the world that can call me mum, and I would love you guys to do it when you can." So I don't think it's necessary for them to call me coach instead of mum. I often tell the girls if they want to call me mum to they can, to speak to what you said. Do you have a personal opinion about that?
I mean, I think it's, again, I'm not a parent, so I
Of
can't
course.
really speak to that
Right.
part. But I think it's definitely, as with all of this, I think it's very unique to the specific situation and to the individuals involved and their own preferences. Some parents, said that they wanted them to call them mom or dad, and some were very clear that no, when we're in practice or we're at a game, my child calls me coach and nothing else. And so they were very clear on that. And I think it's just kind of whatever works best for you and your child is the best way to go for that.
And it feels like that. Therefore, there needs to be a negotiation between parent and child. I mean, again, the last section here of interpersonal knowledge is this idea of wearing different hats that runs counter to being team mum. It's understanding that during the session you're coach, and then once you leave the parking lot, then you become mum or dad again.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So the next section, intrapersonal knowledge as a parent coach, finding a balance, perceptions of favoritism. Can you break down for us the intrapersonal knowledge as a parent coach?
Yeah, so the interpersonal knowledge was, again, talking more about the reflection and the introspection that parent coaches are doing. And I think a main thing that came out of that section was that parent coaches were extremely concerned about being perceived as making biased decisions involving their child. So that could be playing time, position assignments, team cuts, captainships, and things like that. And so balancing prioritizing their own child's success and development with also being fair and equitable to all the other players was definitely something that was a challenge for parent coaches and something that they internally grappled with for sure. And I think there was a bit of discomfort between their beliefs and what they believed in and the behaviors and what they were actually doing. And so that was difficult for them. And so that also kind of led to coaches talking about overcompensating and being unfair towards their own child, compared to other athletes. And so just to avoid that perception of favoritism. And so with that, a lot of coaches talked about their own child losing out on opportunities, such as awards or captainships and opportunities like that. Their own child actually lost out because they were kind of trying to overcompensate and go the other direction. So they ended up not choosing their child for things just so that other parents didn't perceive that they were favoring their own child.
Yeah, as one parent says here, one challenge is trying to make decisions about who makes the team and who doesn't. I mean, it's got to be enormously challenging for parent coaches to make decisions, whether that's to leave their child out of the team or put them in, especially when it's fairly dubious as to whether they should be in the team. But I'm guessing slightly easier at younger age groups for things like that. I suppose for younger age groups, there's fewer decisions to make because it's much more, well, at least you hope it's much more participative and every player getting an opportunity to play. But I would imagine as coaches coach older age groups and greater decisions are having to be made, that feels like it would be slightly more challenging.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of coaches actually talked about that exact thing where at the younger age groups when they were coaching their child, it wasn't as big of a deal because there's age-related policies that the program kind of has in place to make sure that there's playing time rules and position rules and things like that where um, it helps them kind of reduce those decision making and therefore they don't have to worry about the perceptions of favoritism. And so there were some coaches that talked about, when my child gets to that age where those policies are no longer in place, then I will probably step back from coaching just so I don't have to be responsible for making those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, one parent says here, I'll pick a captain on a weekly basis, and I think I've only picked her, as in her daughter, twice, just to steer clear of the potential of people getting upset. I mean, it's just, it feels like it's not worth coaching your child, a team with your child in, if you have to make skewed decisions like that.
It's very difficult for sure. And then thinking from a coaching effectiveness
Hmm.
lens too, a lot of the time and effort that parent coaches are needing to focus on the potential perceptions of favoritism, whether real or imagined, is taking away from the time and effort that could be used for other coaching responsibilities like drill planning and practice planning and those other development that coaches can be doing themselves. And so it kind of takes away from coach development, but then in turn also athlete development as well.
I think what you've said there is really, really pertinent. I'm thinking from a coach effectiveness perspective. I mean, you're almost talking about the fundamentals, the activity design, the basic coaching behaviors that one engages in. Do I ask questions? Do I instruct? Do I step in? Do I stay back? Um, uh, those things feel like they can be disrupted when a coach has to invest their effort and their energy and their attentional resources into, well, my child is here and I have to consider um, my behaviors around my child, let alone where when you've got a coach who's trying to be really effective and maybe introduce some of the psychosocial elements such as leadership and teamwork and so on and so forth. I mean, that feels like that's definitely going to be out the window if they can't even engage in the fundamentals.
Absolutely, yeah. So then you're taking away from opportunities for your own child's development because of your time and energy being taken up by, reflecting and taking the time to figure out that relationship. But then also all the other athletes on the team are also then to a detriment because then you don't have the time or energy to build those relationships with them and build their skills too. So yeah, it's definitely challenging for sure.
And I think, I mean, as we dive deeper into this, it's making my mind think about more stuff here, and it's making me think of, what are the players thinking? What mind reading is going on here? What feelings and emotions are players experiencing as a consequence of knowing that their coach has a child or a young player on the pitch or on the court as they're practicing? And so the players themselves I'm not saying this is all the time. I mean, I'm looking at this through a slightly negative lens right now, and I'm not saying it can't be dealt with, but again, if we think about attentional resources, you're potentially taking the attention of players away from the game, learning, engagement with the game. If they are concerned that, oh, coach has little Johnny or little Mary on our team, and that's not fair and it's not right, and how's that coach treating them as compared to us? So there's probably quite a lot of mind reading and thinking and emoting and feelings going on that can impact engagement, learning, and performance.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, for sure, there's definitely those perceptions from the athletes as well about, the attentional aspects of where my coach's attention is. But then if you flip it and go back to the coach's own child, and then maybe they're not giving them any feedback, and so then the coach's child is, well, why am I not getting any feedback, right? Why am I being overlooked and I'm not developing and I'm losing out on opportunities? So it's a bit of a catch 22 where if you give too much attention to one and not the other, so it's definitely difficult for sure, and coaches for sure talked about that.
And let's come back to that stat that you mentioned. 90% of coaches are coach parent.
Yeah.
They have that role, so that puts it in perspective. Now, as I said, I am looking at this through a slightly critical lens, but I think that's important to do in order to find solutions, in order to the point of your research is to explore the challenges and
Exactly.
potentially the solutions. Part 3 of results centers around, and we're looking at the third aspect of Cote and Gilbert's coach effectiveness model, the professional and the sport specific knowledge. And that is as a coach parent, and there's a few subsections here. Please unpack this for us.
Yeah, so the one is the kind of the lack of parent coach training and education, and so a lot of the parent coaches that I interviewed discussed that they didn't have any training or education or exposure to what it's like being a parent coach when they were going through their certification or going through coach development opportunities, and that was something that they felt would be very beneficial to have, and just kind of open up the discussion of maybe some strategies that could be used prior to going into it, and just being able to talk to other parent coaches as well to kind of share in those experiences was definitely something that was important to coaches, because that wasn't something that they were exposed to, so that was important to them. And then the other section of it was the evaluation of skill, and so this is a really interesting section where it kind of talked about how the parent coach's child's skill level sort of mediated some of the challenges related to playing time or favoritism. And so parent coaches that reported their child as one of the higher skilled players on the team felt more confident and able to make those decisions, such as playing time or captainship, compared to parent coaches whose child was maybe lower skilled on the team. And so those parents kind of experience a lack of confidence and more uncertainty in their ability to make appropriate decisions because they felt that they would be judged by other parents or for giving their child more opportunities, and maybe they were undeserving opportunities. And so it was really interesting that the skill level, like we were talking about before with the like perceptions of favoritism, it kind of mediated that because some coaches, the ones that said that their child was kind of the top three on the team, they felt justified in their decision making. They felt that, everyone can see that my child is very good, and so I don't need to worry about perceptions because it's very obvious to everyone. Whereas coaches whose child were maybe not as good, they felt they were very challenged when they were making the decisions because they didn't want to be perceived like they were favoring anyone.
Hell of a minefield to be able to navigate. Just backing up a second, the lack of parent coach training and education. I mean, it's enormously challenging for governing bodies and for organizations, clubs, teams, etc., because there's so much support that coaches require. But centering on your statistics here, I'm sorry to harp on about it again, but the 90%, right, there are a lot of coach, parent, dual role coaches out there, right? It makes sense that there is some investment in education. And I'm guessing this is in part why you're doing what you're doing to be able to offer this.
Yeah.
It does make sense, but I've never come across it, to be honest. We all know that this exists, that this challenge exists, but I've never really come across any formal training or education. I don't know if you have, but I'm not really formulating a question. It's just a thought about this initial bit of feedback from them that it seems crazy that there is a lack of training and education.
It does seem crazy for sure, and I think that, yeah, like you said, the whole reason why I'm doing this is to try and get some more supports to parent coaches, and I think that it's important to recognize that while parent coaches are coaches, they're not like any other coaches, and they have different challenges to navigate and unique barriers. And I think that because of those unique situations that they're in, they need to be supported differently than any other coach. And so I think that's really important to recognize when we're looking at professional development opportunities and coach certification programs and what we can do to support this unique demographic of coaches, especially given that the percentage of them is so high.
And then just closing this part of the section of the results, the professional and sports specific knowledge, as you eloquently described, the evaluation of skill. I mean, hey, if your kid's good, it's going to help, isn't it?
Yes, for sure.
You can just play them and there's going to be less concern. Obviously, it depends on your philosophy of participation and your club's philosophy on participation, but that must make a difference. Absolutely fascinating results section, and all of this stuff is pretty new. As you said, there's really not any prior knowledge in this area other than what we intuitively might think or feel. So, always following a results session, there's a big broad discussion section. So what did you and your co-authors sort of discuss after finding out these results? What were your thoughts and analysis?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things was just like we were talking about the lack of parent coach training and education and what sport organizations can do to kind of help with that and mitigate that. And I think one of the big things that we talked about was kind of creating, maybe peer support with parent coaches, whether that's through forums or peer mentorship programs, where it really provides that opportunity that coaches were asking for about connecting with other parent coaches and talking about strategies and learning about the things that they may come across and some of the challenges and some of the things that they can do. And so I think some of those things, even if it's not, a strict module, let's say in coach certification, but just some sort of support that coaches feel that they have when they're going through this experience with their child. Because while a lot of the conversations that we had with coaches was about the barriers and the challenges, there was still a lot of positive aspects that they talked about as well. And so those things were really important to coaches. And so I think being able to support parents in their journey of coaching, if that's what they want to do, is really important because a lot of them do have a really great experience with their child and sharing that love of sport with their child. So I think that's very important.
So very much the idea of peer-to-peer support, and I suppose the support being as much emotional as anything else.
Yeah, for sure. Just being able to talk to other parent coaches, and I think that maybe happens informally
Yeah.
sometimes, but being able to kind of set up opportunities where parents can talk to each other, and yeah, that emotional support for sure, and just sharing strategies for some challenges. And I think there's there's so much that can be said about just sharing an experience with someone and saying, what, I've been through that too, and this is what I did, and just kind of feeling that you're not the only one in that situation experiencing that challenge as a parent.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. Hey, what's next for you? Are there follow-ups here, or is there a life decision for you coming up?
That's a good question. So trying to figure all of that out right now.
That's the hardest question I've asked so far, right?
Yes, exactly.
Let me strip it back for you then. Is there anything coming up with relation to this line of inquiry, this piece of research?
Not with me specifically. Throughout my master's, I've kind of transitioned a little bit towards more of the interpersonal skills with their athletes, with coaches in general, and
Okay.
not just with parent coaches. And so, not with me specifically, but I definitely think there's tons of opportunities for researchers to look at the parent coaches with coaching effectiveness and what we can do to better support them. And maybe that's research on, what would a coaching module look like, and what would these sport or support processes and resources look like for coaches. My research, they
Mhm.
said that that was definitely something that would be necessary, but kind of looking at what specifically does that look like, I think would be kind of a great next step for this research.
And just pausing on that idea of you transitioning more towards understanding interpersonal qualities of coaches. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you've learned over the last few months or year or so of your master's there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I did in my master's was I created this tool, and it's called the Coach Leadership Reflection Tool. And what we did was we kind of took some research from the medical and educational settings where they have this pre brief, observation, debrief framework. And we kind of put that into a coaching context with respect to interpersonal skills. And so, if anyone has ever gone through coach certification before, you kind of go through this process where you meet with the developer beforehand. They come and observe you for your certification, and then you meet with them afterwards and you debrief. And so, we did the exact same thing. We just focused, instead of on the technical, tactical, we focused on the interpersonal and intrapersonal. So, those social relationships and the reflection. And so, what I ended up doing was creating that tool and then piloting it with coaches and getting their feedback on the tool. And so that was a really awesome experience, being able to go in and observe coaches and talk to them about their experiences with the tool and obtain really great feedback about their experiences with it. And so we had very positive feedback about the tool, which is awesome. And we learned some very interesting things from coaches as well about, not exactly knowing how to develop their interpersonal skills with their athletes, and how that is a very underrepresented area with coach development opportunities as well, and trying to get them support and more opportunities to learn that early on.
And just briefly before we close, I'm interested just to dig just a little bit deeper into that one. How are you defining those interpersonal skills? What skills are you specifically speaking to there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we looked at the transformational leadership behaviors, and so and well, really the full range leadership model, and so transformational leadership was the big one there, and then transactional, laissez-faire, and toxic. And so when I went to do the observations of the coaches, I would observe, the frequency and the meaningfulness of how they were engaging with each of those leadership behaviors and what that looked like. And so then we were able to kind of debrief that afterwards with the coach, and kind of show them what was observed, and what they engaged in and how they were transformational or how they were toxic, and then set some goals for the future and really talk with them about how we could improve those behaviors. So how could I be more transformational? How can I be less toxic? And so those were the specific behaviors that we were looking for. And so that's kind of the interpersonal level. And then it also brought in the intrapersonal with the reflection, because they were able to reflect through an activity that they did independently on kind of what they were displaying during their practice. And then also through the conversations that we had, they had opportunities to reflect on the behaviors that they were doing, and if they were displaying them, and if they really focus on the interpersonal behaviors, or if they just focus on the technical, tactical.
I think there's a really interesting juxtaposition between your two lines of inquiry here in terms of the dual coach parent role and then your work there on the interstroke intrapersonal skills for coaches. And I'm saying an interesting juxtaposition because I think if we do go again, I'm going to harp on about this statistic, 90%, that a lot, not all, but a lot of coaches end up coaching because they've been parents of young people keen to engage in sport. They fall into coaching and they don't necessarily have appropriate frameworks to underpin their coaching. They might learn a little bit about the technical, tactical side of the game, and that's often where it ends. Whereas what you're saying there, I love that idea of, it's Bernard Bass, isn't it? The transformational leadership. And we've spoken quite a bit about that on some episodes on the Sports Site show historically. And using transformational leadership as an example, it's not the only leadership model out there, but the transformational transactional leadership, and using that as a framework to underpin interpersonal skills, interpersonal relationships. It's, to me, my eyes light up when I think about coaches having frameworks, often evidence-driven frameworks for their coaching. I think that's absolutely imperative.
For sure, yeah, and I think that was a really big finding that came out of my master's thesis, was that coaches really felt that they appreciated the structured approach to the tool because they didn't really know what they were doing when they were reflecting on interpersonal skills. They knew that it was important that they have positive relationships with their athletes, but they don't know how to do that. And so I think giving them the framework, like you said, really gives them a structured approach to that, and they can say, okay, I did do this really well, or I didn't do this as well, and I need to improve on this. So it's not as daunting anymore because they have something to go off of. And now that they've kind of gone through the tool, they have experience with it. And so going forward, they can look back on those specific behaviors and reflect, I think, more effectively than they would previously, because I think it's really easy for coaches to reflect on their technical, tactical, we do this really well as a team, but we don't do this really well. But it's a little bit more difficult to reflect on those relationships with their athletes and the leadership behaviors that they're displaying. And so giving them that structure and that framework, I think, was really beneficial for sure.
Fantastic. Mia, brilliant. Absolutely loved every second of that. Really, really interesting. And it's an area we've done quite a bit on, sports parenting, but not that side of things, and really interesting to unpack. And I'm sure the research literature is going to grow and build. And you're a pioneer in this area. So there you go. Name up in lights. Can't thank you enough for coming on and discussing this with us. I always ask, I know you're at a slight crossroads with regard where you're going to take things. I'm sure you're going to stay in coaching and build on the research that you've done. But for those who, and I know countless people listening in, will be interested in potentially finding you, following you. So how can people do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you Google my name, most of the stuff will come up, but you can email me at 17mjk9@queensu.ca. And then I'm also on X at Mia_JKF. But yeah, I'm always happy to chat with people about parent coaching and youth sport and coaching. It's what I love. So yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via X or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode.